Imagine being the most powerful man in the world, and then hiding in a hole in the ground, too afraid to even breathe too loudly. Size. Imagine having 50 palaces, a private army, nuclear ambitions, and the power to execute anyone who looked at you the wrong way, and then being pulled out of the dirt by a 22-year-old soldier who tells you President Bush sends his regards. Surprised. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This actually happened. This is the true story of Saddam Hussein, one of the most feared dictators in human history, and the night everything came crashing down. To understand how a man ends up in a hole in the ground, you first have to understand who he was. Because Saddam Hussein was not just a bad leader, he was not just a corrupt politician, he was something far darker. And the story of his fall only hits as hard as it does when you understand just how high he had once stood. Saddam Hussein was born on April 28, 1937, in a tiny mud brick village called Al-Auja, a few kilometers outside Tikrit in northern Iraq. No father, no money, no future by the standards of that world. His father either died or abandoned the family before Saddam was even born. He was raised by his uncle, a hardened military man with extreme nationalist beliefs, who filled the young boy's head with stories of Arab glory and the enemies trying to destroy it. From the very beginning, Saddam was different. Not in a quiet, genius kind of way, in a dangerous kind of way. He was the boy who other boys were afraid of, the teenager who carried a gun before most of his peers had jobs. He joined the Ba'ath Party, an Arab nationalist political movement, at 18 years old, and by 22, he had already attempted to assassinate the Prime Minister of Iraq. The assassination failed. Saddam was shot in the leg. He ran. He crossed the desert on horseback. He fled to Syria, then Egypt. Most people in that situation would have considered their political career finished before it had even started. Saddam considered it a beginning. He returned to Iraq. He climbed. He schemed. He eliminated rivals with a ruthlessness that even his allies found disturbing. And on July 16, 1979, at the age of 42, Saddam Hussein declared himself president of Iraq. Within days, not months, not years, within days of taking power, he held a meeting of senior Ba'ath Party officials. A confession was read aloud, naming dozens of men in that very room as traitors. One by one, those men were called forward, taken outside, and executed. Some accounts suggest Saddam personally participated in the killings. Whether or not that is true, what is certain is this: he sat and watched, and he made sure everyone else in that room watched too. The message was simple: I will kill anyone, including you, including your family. Do not test me. Nobody tested him. For the next 2 decades, Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq through a combination of absolute terror and carefully distributed reward. If you were loyal, truly, visibly, performatively loyal, you could have wealth, status, security. If you were suspected of disloyalty, even whispered disloyalty, you could disappear overnight. His secret police, the Mukhabarat, had informants everywhere. Neighbors reported neighbors. Children were encouraged to report their parents. No space was safe. No conversation was private. He launched a devastating war against Iran in 1980 that lasted 8 years and killed hundreds of thousands of people on both sides, and ended essentially in a draw, having achieved nothing except mountains of bodies. He invaded Kuwait in 1990, an act of naked territorial aggression that triggered the Gulf War and brought the United States to the region for the first time. But the darkest moment, the moment that defines what kind of man Saddam Hussein truly was, came in 1988. During a military campaign against the Kurdish population of northern Iraq, Iraqi forces deployed chemical weapons against civilian villages, nerve agents, mustard gas. The attack on the Kurdish town of Halabja killed an estimated 5,000 people in a single day. Entire families were found dead in the streets, frozen in their final positions, having had no warning, no chance to run, no chance to survive. 5,000 people, in one town, in one day. And Saddam did not apologize. He did not hesitate. He moved on to the next thing. This was the man the world was hunting in 2003. When the United States and its coalition partners invaded Iraq on March 20, 2003, the military campaign itself was swift and overwhelming. Within 3 weeks, Baghdad had fallen. And on April 9, 2003, the defining image of the war was broadcast live around the world. A massive statue of Saddam Hussein in Firdos Square, being pulled down by a U.S. military vehicle while a crowd gathered to watch. It was the symbolic end of the regime. But Saddam himself, the man, the actual human being, was gone. He had vanished. And with him vanished any sense of closure. The U.S. military designated him high-value target number 1. They printed his face on the ace of spades in a deck of 55 playing cards distributed to soldiers. Each card, a wanted Iraqi official. They placed a bounty of $25 million on his head, and for 9 months, nothing. There were rumors constantly. Saddam was seen in Mosul. Saddam was in Syria. Saddam had a network of tunnels running under Baghdad. Each lead was followed. Each lead went nowhere. The frustration inside the military and intelligence community was enormous. Thousands of soldiers. The most advanced surveillance technology on Earth. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, human intelligence networks. And one aging, isolated, resource-stripped dictator was somehow still out there. Meanwhile, his sons, Uday and Qusay, were located and killed in a firefight in Mosul on July 22, 2003. The 2 men who had been Saddam's heirs, his enforcers, his family legacy, were dead. Saddam was now completely alone. No family around him, no loyal army, no palace, no government, just a fugitive, moving in the dark, trusting almost no one. Here is where the story gets fascinating, because what Saddam did was something that, in hindsight, was both deeply logical and deeply human. He went home. Not to a palace, not to a bunker with armed guards and sophisticated escape routes. He went back to the small, rural, tribal communities around Tikrit, the same villages that had produced him, the same families that had supported his rise, the same people who, for reasons of tribe and loyalty and fear, might be willing to shelter him even now. He was betting on one thing, that the traditional bonds of tribal loyalty in that part of Iraq ran deeper than $25 million. He was almost right. For months, intelligence teams had been quietly, methodically building a picture of Saddam's network around Tikrit. They were not looking for Saddam directly. They knew they would not find him that way. They were looking for the people around him, the cousins, the former bodyguards, the village elders with old connections, the men who drove the cars and bought the food and passed the messages. They were mapping a human network, and slowly, painstakingly, the map was getting more detailed. Then, on the morning of December 13, 2003, at approximately 11:45 a.m., U.S. forces arrested a man in Baghdad. This man was not a general. He was not a politician. He was not a soldier. He was a member of Saddam's extended family and inner circle, a man who had, at one point, served as Saddam's personal bodyguard. The BBC's Panorama documentary, broadcast in 2004, identified him as Mohammed Ibrahim Omar al-Muslit. Inside Saddam's inner circle, he was known by a nickname that was both simple and descriptive. They called him the Fat Man. Under interrogation that afternoon, the Fat Man gave up the location, a small farm compound near the village of Ad-Dar, 15 kilometers south of Tikrit, on the western bank of the Tigris River. The intelligence teams cross-referenced the location with everything they had collected over the previous months. The pieces aligned. This was real. This was credible. This was it. By midday, a mission was being assembled. By afternoon, soldiers were being briefed. By evening, 600 men were moving. The mission was named Operation Red Dawn, after the 1984 American film. 2 target sites near the farm were identified. 2 assault teams were formed and given the code names Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. The objective was clean and brutal in its simplicity: capture or kill. As darkness fell over the Tigris River Valley, the convoy moved out. 600 soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division, moving quietly through flat Iraqi farmland under a cold December sky, helicopters circling above, command teams monitoring in real time, everyone knowing that tonight might be the night. At 8 p.m., both target sites were hit simultaneously. Wolverine 1, Wolverine 2. Both compounds raided at exactly the same moment. Saddam was not at either location. For a moment, silence on the radio. The worst kind of silence. The kind that meant another night of nothing, another dead end. Another report filed that said the target was not present. But Colonel James Hickey, coordinating the operation, made a decision. They were not leaving. They sealed the entire area, locked it down completely, and began expanding the search outward, into the surrounding farmland, into the fields and compounds and patches of darkness that lay between the two target sites and the river. And that is when they found it. A small, walled compound, completely unremarkable, a low mud brick wall, a simple iron gate, a rough hut, the kind of structure you could drive past 1,000 times and never give a second glance. Soldiers entered the compound and began to sweep it. Nothing obvious, nothing alarming. Just a quiet farm in the middle of the night. And then, the ground. One soldier noticed something. A small section of earth near the hut that didn't look quite right. The surface had been disturbed. Bricks and loose dirt had been carefully arranged to blend in with the surrounding ground. And over it all, a dirty, worn carpet had been pressed into the earth and covered with a thin layer of soil. It looked like nothing. To a trained soldier searching for exactly this kind of concealment, it looked like everything. They moved the carpet. They pulled away the bricks. They brushed aside the dirt. And there, beneath a wooden board, was a hole in the ground, barely 2 feet wide, dark, silent, a spider hole. Colonel Hickey described what happened next. The soldiers lowered themselves and peered down into the darkness of the hole. There was movement, a shape shifting in the black, then a shadow taking form, then eyes, looking back up at them from the dirt. The soldiers raised their weapons and issued commands. 1 second passed, 2 seconds, 3. Then 2 hands emerged from the darkness. Open, empty, palms facing upward. He was surrendering. The soldiers reached down into the hole and physically pulled him out, into the cold night air, into the beams of flashlights and the noise of soldiers and the sound of helicopters overhead. At exactly 10:36 p.m. on December 13, 2003, Saddam Hussein was standing above ground. For a moment, nobody spoke. This was him, the man on the ace of spades, the man with $25 million on his head, the man who had gassed Halabja, invaded Kuwait, filled mass graves across Iraq, and ruled 40 million people through terror for 24 years. He was 66 years old. His hair was long, tangled, and matted with dirt. His beard was thick and gray and wild, completely unrecognizable from the clean-shaven, military-uniformed figure the world knew from television. His clothes were filthy. He was disoriented. He looked around at the soldiers surrounding him, blinking in the flashlight beams, struggling to process where he was and what was happening. He had a pistol on him. He did not use it. The man who had ordered the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people did not fire a single shot in his own defense. Not one shot. He simply stood there, held up by American soldiers on either side, blinking in the light. And then, he spoke. He straightened himself as much as a man covered in dirt can straighten himself. He looked at the soldiers around him, and in English, clear, deliberate English, he said, "My name is Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq, and I want to negotiate." There was a pause. One of the Special Forces soldiers standing in front of him looked back and said, "President Bush sends his regards." The spider hole itself told the full story of how Saddam had been living. It was 6 to 8 feet deep, just enough space for one person to lie down flat in the darkness with a few inches to spare. A narrow ventilation shaft had been dug through the earth to allow air to flow in. A basic exhaust fan had been installed, hand-powered, to keep the air from going stale. Connected to the pit was a tiny 2-room underground structure. One room was a bedroom. Fresh clothes hung from pegs in the dirt wall. New t-shirts, clean socks, still in their packaging, as if he had been preparing to stay down there for months more. The second room was a rudimentary kitchen with a water supply. This is how one of the wealthiest dictators in history had been living. Underground, in the dark, eating whatever was brought to him, listening for footsteps above, waiting. Major General Odierno later explained the system. Whenever U.S. forces were known to be active in the area, Saddam would abandon the mud hut above ground, lower himself into the spider hole, pull the carpet and wooden board over himself, and wait in complete silence until the soldiers passed. He had been doing this for months, and from that hole, Across the flat plain of the Tigris Valley, he could actually see his palaces, those massive gold-domed, marble-floored monuments to his own power that lined the riverbank. He had built them as symbols of his invincibility, and he had watched them from a hole in the ground. Major General Odierno, reflecting on this later, said simply, "I think it was the ultimate irony that a man who had built some of the most opulent palaces in the world was found hiding in a hole in the ground." Near the compound sat a white and orange taxi, his escape vehicle, engine presumably ready in case he needed to run at a moment's notice. Inside the underground chambers, soldiers recovered $750,000 in $100 bills, 2 AK-47 rifles, and a briefcase of documents. There was no mobile phone, no radio, no satellite equipment, no communications technology of any kind. Saddam Hussein had been completely, totally cut off from the outside
push the objective
world.
now.
He could not
Weapons free on
command.
confirmed
He could not
targets.
communicate. He could not even know what was happening in his own country. He could only hide and wait and hope. The man who provided the final tip, Mohammed Ibrahim Omar al-Muslit, the fat man, was never given the $25 million reward because he had not come forward voluntarily. The information had been extracted under interrogation. By the letter of the reward program's requirements, he did not qualify. He gave up the most wanted man in the world and walked away with nothing. After his capture, Saddam was transferred to a secure location. A video was released to the international media showing American military doctors conducting a medical examination, checking his hair, looking in his mouth, inspecting his teeth and eyes. He sat through the entire procedure in silence, passive, deflated. The performance of power that had sustained him for decades had finally run out of stage. The trial began in October 2005. He was charged initially in connection with the massacre of 148 Shia men and boys from the town of Dujail in 1982, ordered after a failed assassination attempt against him. He was defiant throughout. He challenged the court's legitimacy. He refused to enter pleas. He lectured the judges. He was Saddam Hussein until the very end, unable or unwilling to drop the mask even as the walls closed in around him. On November 5, 2006, the tribunal found him guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced him to death. On December 30, 2006, exactly 3 years, 17 days after he had been pulled from that hole in Ad-Dawr, Saddam Hussein was executed by hanging in Baghdad. A mobile phone video of the execution leaked online within hours. In his final moments, as the noose was placed around his neck, people in the room taunted him. He responded with prayers and defiance. And then, silence. The story of Operation Red Dawn is, at its deepest level, not really a story about military tactics or intelligence operations or even justice. It is a story about the illusion of power and what happens when that illusion finally breaks. Saddam Hussein spent his entire life building an image of invincibility, an image that said, "I cannot be touched, I cannot be stopped. I am the state, and the state is eternal." But images are not real. Power built on fear is not real. The moment the fear stops working, the moment one person decides that $25 million, or revenge, or simple survival is worth more than loyalty, the entire structure collapses. And what is left underneath? A tired old man in a dirty hole, hands raised, ready to negotiate. He said his name was Saddam Hussein and that he was the president of Iraq. The soldiers knew exactly who he was, and they also knew he was president of nothing anymore.